Okay, so continuing on the legacy of life from places I've lived. Okay, so my time in Emont Bridge, Scoresgill Lane, Penrith, Cumbria, between 1993 stroke 4 on to 1997 when I left. I left then to go back and live with my father in Burnley. I would have been 21 when I left home. Yeah, 21, 97. And not really should tell you everything, to be honest. So just again, a simple layout of where I used to live. No doubt Cumbria Constabulary will confirm everything that I'm saying here, but I'm sure they've got their own problems at the moment. Right, so from what I remember of it, like I say, I don't know whether things have changed or I don't know how much has changed in, just under 30 years or whatever it is. How am I in about 30 years? God's sake. 2017. Like 24 years, yeah. So, roundabout at the Penrith roundabout, the A66 roundabout, whichever roundabout you want to call it. I think I'll start at the top. So, if we start from the main roundabout here, Cumbria Constabulary Training Headquarters was there. I understand it still is. The A66 was the continuation on being from all the way over in Whitehaven, I think it stretches to. If you kept going A66, this is one of the ways I would go to Newcastle. There'd be a few different ways I'd go to Newcastle. Sometimes I would take the A66. You got to remember, is I went back to Newcastle every weekend on night out with David Chadwick and Corey. Why am I having to explain this? I'm having to explain this is because it needs an update in regards to my YouTube account, Space Idiotic, you see. And I haven't put this into the Space Idiotic account because from my best guess estimation, that there's people manipulating all kinds of evidence out there saying it's their data and everything when it just isn't, and the police know it. So A66, I used to go a different ways. Sometimes I would go A66 to Scotch Corner and then get on the A1 and go to Newcastle that way. Sometimes I would go this way, to Alston. Basically, I would come out here, top of the roundabout, and I'd take this exit. This road will take you all the way to Alston. Keep going through the villages and so forth. It'll take you to the base, you could say. And then we'll take you, if you keep ascending, we'll take you to the highest cafe, and then we'll take you. It's basically the short route over to Newcastle. I used to do it in like, an hour and a half, an hour, 40 minutes. But, that's not up for me to, analyze how fast I was driving. But I'd do it in about an hour and 40 minutes if I go this way. But in the wintertime, you're wasting your time because in Cumbria, the winter's really bad. Everything gets snowed in, everything's full of ice, and it takes you a lot longer. So basically, you've got to go either the A66 or the A69. You gotta remember, I was only like, a 17-year-old kid. Just learning to drive, finding my own feet. In fact, I'll never forget the first time I travelled over to Newcastle in my blue Orion registration, D747, Sierra Romeo Mike, I think the reg plate was. Sachi's mother and my grandmother lent me the money for it. It was like £1,600 Orion, blue Orion. Nice looking, neat car. Tim and Chads were pretty jealous. I was so excited. like you wouldn't believe, as you always are with your first car. And they were, my mother and Satch were always really paranoid that I'd always have to call every time I got back, because they were just so insistent. Why didn't you call? Why didn't you call? And I'd always have to call when I got the Tims on North Farm Road in Evan, to say that I'd got there. Because you remember I was only like 17. But it just goes to show you, like, at 17, no, over, depending on whether you need a car at 17 and where you're at in the world, it will depend on whether you actually need it. When you live in the Lake District and you're just growing up and you need a car, there are no buses. Well, there are buses, but you're wasting your time. You need a car and you need to be able to drive, and drive quick. So, like this 17-year-old kid in this, £1,600 Orion, gorgeous, absolutely beautiful. Never forget it. For the day it was, anyway. It was only a D-Reg or whatever, and it wasn't like the most modern, but it was, for a 17-year-old kid, it's your world, isn't it? Where you polish it every 5 seconds, and you just want to sit in it, and you don't want to get out of it, and you've got those tunes blaring and so forth. But I'd go this way sometimes in the summer, spring, and late autumn and stuff. But I'll never forget my first journey over by myself to Newcastle. I actually took the mountain road, and it was on a night time. And I misjudged just past the cafe when you get to the top, before Alston. I think it was something about half a mile down the road. I was turning one of the corners, and the corners were like really, really sharp. And your driving skills, you need to know. Basically, you've got to be prepared, because some of the dips are just blindsiding. And I misjudged one of the corners, and I got a flat. My first big journey over to Newcastle by myself, 17-year-old kid, really nervous, and I got a fucking flat. It was black as anything, no lights, anything. Anyway, this couple stopped, and I hope for God's sake they're still out there. You gotta remember, this would have been about 94, I think, 1994. And they stopped on top of, I had to flag them down literally, because, and I've not told this story yet, because basically I've never had the need to. Well, I don't need to now, but it's the better that the lug knows, the better. So I basically misjudged one of the corners, and I got a flat. I'm sure it was my back left, as I was turning one of the corners, and I'd hit a rock. One of these like kind of like boulders that was kind of like leaning out, and I'd misjudged it. I went, oh shit. Anyway, this guy and this woman stopped, and they were really kind enough to help me change my tyre, because I'd never changed a tyre before. I'd never prepared, never been taught, never known anything. I'm like, fuck, what do you do? And this guy, God bless his heart, man, and he was really, really nice with his girlfriend. He said, no worry, mate, no worry. And he changed the tyre for me. I'll never forget that. So my love to him out there, by the way, all these years later. So sometimes I would go and I'd go over the mountains through Alston. Now, when you get to the bottom of Alston, what you do is you come back onto the A69. So what you're doing is you're cutting out all of it is the shortcut literally to Newcastle from Penrith, but it's just all the bends and the ascent and the descent, and your driving's got to be really careful at times. It's more trouble than it's worth. But obviously, if you want to take the speedy route, what you would do is you wouldn't go to Alston. Depending, again, how quick you drive, the A66, going to Scotch Corner and getting the A1 all the way over would take me about 2 hours. But it was straightforward and it was easier. But as Cumbria Police will tell you, the A66, where I obviously had my accident, the A66 is literally it's a death trap, especially in the wintertime. And when it's wet, there are so many accidents. Well, there was then in the 90s. Whether there is now, I don't know. But it was you know, I can say this all these years later. The A66, the way it's set out, encourages you to speed. Look, I'll hold my hand up. It encourages you to goddamn speed. It does. That's just really the end of it, because once you get past all the bullshit and you get past a couple of the dodgy turns and all the rest of it, it's a lot of flat road for you to really basically put your foot down. So sometimes I would go the A66. It's really weird actually, because in the summertime I would take the A66. It's weird that, isn't it? In the summertime, because it was a nice drive, especially coming back from Newcastle on a Sunday morning. I'd go out Saturday night and I'd drive back first thing for work at Mile Lane Nurseries. I was watching the sun come up in the summertime and the windows down and the music blaring. It is really something quite beautiful, because nobody's about. You've got the open road, the sun's coming up, it's summertime, and you've obviously got your favourite techno blaring. It's something else when you're growing up, that. So sometimes my consciousness, I'd always decide to go the A66 and take the summer route, you could say. But it's really weird, because like autumn time and around the early part of the year, I would do the A69. It's weird how your mind works. So to get to so you'd go up to Alston. Past Alston, you'd come back onto the A69, or I would take the A66 to Scotch Corner and get the A1 to Newcastle. But a lot of the time, what I would do is I would take the A66 here, turn left, and come on. There's another big roundabout here. This will lead you on to the M6. Now the M6, I haven't drawn it. I'll draw it on another page. Will take you all the way to Carlisle. And you come off at Carlisle, if I remember rightly, it was the third junction past Carlisle. I could be wrong. And I'd get on the A69 that way, and I'd zip across and do it that way. That was always the more convenient one, is to go to Carlisle and then on the A69, past Hayden Bridge and so on, and do it that way. Go past Holt Whistle, and that was always a pleasant drive. But I don't know, it's just weird how things affect you, because that was always it was a kind of sort of like, oh, for God's sake, let's just get on with it. But it took less time. But it was just like, oh, fuck's sake. Whereas the A66, I'd always enjoy the speedy route. It's weird how it all works. So yeah, I'll sketch more about the A66. So you'd come back here, Cumbria Constabulary Training Headquarters there. So you would come down into Emont Bridge here. So this is Emont Bridge. There's a girl here called Ismee Wood. Beautiful blonde girl. I ended up banging. I saw her years later, as I've said before, in a pub, and by God, had that girl grown, if you catch my drift. So you'd go into Scourgegill Lane. Now, there used to be a few houses there, and there used to be like a really tiny caravan park. There used to be caravans until that all got ripped up and houses got built on top of there. There'd be fields to the left, full to the brim of sheep. It'd be like a huge bank here sloping down. One can assume it's still there. And the A66 was behind that. So these sheep literally were an alarm clock. They would wake me up. I wouldn't need an alarm clock. If it wasn't for the beautiful girl at the other top end of the lane coming down on the horse, waking me up, it would be the sheep. It's really quite fascinating how those things can wake you up on time. So go in. Now, we would park our cars in really different ways. I would... the MG Montego, white Montego, would sometimes be there. My Blue Orion would sometimes be there. Or likewise, that would swap from there to there. This was our garage, where I first started working out as a kid, 16, 17, when you really need to start building your back into like a bit wider. As I've said before, these are golden memories. To others, it's nothing. But what I'd do is we never used to. We used to have a sunbed. The sunbed that we had in Field Terrace, we put in the garage. But Satch had all these electronics, all these gizmos and gadgets in and around there. So, but what I would do is I'd come in from work, straight on the sunbed, and I'd start doing pull-ups. What I'd do is, and he'd always used to get at me, just in case things were broken or whatever, I'd take a spade. I'd turn the spade upside down and put it between two wooden like loft beams to the top of the garage as to hold me weight, and I'd consistently do pull-ups and then go on the sunbed and then do the weights, and then I'd come off. I think back now after like a 9-hour day, and I used to do that like a lot of the time. I think now, Jesus. But we would park our car there, the household car, my mother's or Satch's car, and we'd park it here. I'd park my cars there. So there'd be two cars, my mother's car and Satch's car. At one point we had a black Jeep. That was quite nifty. And then we had a silver Corolla, Toyota Corolla, which was quite nice for the time. It's like a Celica, if I remember rightly. It was tight in the back, but it was a nice little car. Like I said, for the time. Here it was like a white gate, small tiny white gate. We'd have like a small fountain there, which a poor goldfish I ended up putting in to see whether it survived, and it did. We had a tree in the end when Tara was put down. They buried her at the bottom of the garden there. We had a summer house there, which would flood every autumn time. How and why would it flood? As I've said before, when the hills and everything get drowned out, what happens is the River Emont gets flooded, and it takes everybody and everything with it, and literally the water would flood all the way up to these steps sometimes, and would be sunk in water like 3 feet, sometimes 4 feet of water when it was really bad, until it rescinded. They've got video footage, from what I remember, of just it constantly just gushing out. It was that bad. But for me, is that when it rescinded, obviously, because I was a trout fisherman at the time, what I'd do is I'd come to the bottom of the garden, wait for the water to go down. All of the trout that were in the trout farms, I think there's about 2 further upriver, would flood out and escape into the River Emont. Now, normally you'd have wild brown trout, and wild brown trout won't grow that big. But rainbows have like 10, 15 pound ready for sale when they get out of their tanks because of the flooding. What it'd do is they'd get into the River Emont, come down, and I'd basically put frozen prawns on. And I was just pulling them out left, right and centre. It was quite spectacular, to be honest, if you like fishing, that is. So this was a summer house here. I'd spend many winter nights down there, learning about acting, teaching myself all kinds of things, educating myself about the dramatic arts and everything. I'd read books, recite plays, poetry, speeches, all kinds of things, copy things off films, copy actors, the typical things that you do when you want to get into performing arts. And as I've said many times before, in the wintertime, there's no better place. Well, there is, obviously, I just haven't seen it yet. But from what I know in my experience, is that when it's a clear sky in Cumbria, you can see everything up there, and it is amazing. -10, it really, especially as well. No, we won't get into that. Well, not yet, anyway. So this was the River Emont. The River Emont going down, all the way down here. There'd be 2 patches of grass. There'd be a patch of grass there and a patch of grass there. That River Emont goes there. There's the bridge there. Now to the right, I'm not sure whether it's still there, but the Beehive pub, we used to drink in there all the time. Did you keep going down at the River Emont? Before the bridge, there's like a dirt track that goes off to the right, which is probably still there. Billy Williams bought this land. This was a derelict wasteland, and he turned it into the most beautiful house, which is probably, you can still see it there. From what I understand, it used to be like a, not a windmill, what do you call it? Water turbine places where they'd have the turbine in there and everything. Anyways, he redone all that up, turned it into a beautiful home and sold it, from what I can remember. That was back in the 90s, mid-90s. So you'd have some woodland here. The River Emont would go on all the way on to Broome. You keep going up here, I'm sure that was Broome Castle up here. But as you cross these lands, what I'd do is I'd trespass. I'd go either sometimes across the bridge, over the fields and over the fields and over the fields. And when you get over here, the woodland becomes a lot more exclusive, a lot more precious, a lot more heavily guarded. But some of the fishing there is so tranquil. Hard, but really tranquil. And you kind of like, there's nobody about there. It really is someone else. It was back then anyway. So you would go up this dirt track here. There'd be like a few steps over to a public footpath where you'd have to get over another few steps to get into this track that would take you through this tiny woodland and back onto the public footpath, which would go round Cumbria Constabulary. But what I used to do is go over these steps. There used to be like a patch of land here that was barbed wired off. From there to there, it was almost like a no man's land. I'd have to jump over this barbed wire fence here, cross over here, jump over some more barbed wire fence. And here was police training headquarters football pitch. The posts were up. There was nobody around. Nobody from the police, that is, ever bothered me whatsoever. They would have their firing range around there, and you'd consistently hear them firing off when I was taking goal kicks. So nobody ever said anything. Because obviously I was big on goalkeeping at the time, and my goal kicks were just disastrous. I'd constantly just practice them over that way. I'd always use this goal there. But the woodland, the forest would be hit. The trees were round the side. You'd see all kinds of wildlife, red squirrel, grey squirrel, all kinds of wildlife that would hang out and about round here. And these trees are really, really tall as well. And in the autumn time, when they'd blow, it's really atmospheric. So that's your roundabout. That's explained there. So I would come, obviously, back to Orchard House. This was the dining room. This was the kitchen. Obviously, this was the front door. There was a short window there and a short window there. You could see into the hallway. We'd have another door you'd have to go through. And on the right-hand side, there'd be a grandfather clock there. Here would be the fireplace. Here would be the dining table. And there'd be another door leading to a side garden there. We'd have a barometer on the wall there. And our window looking onto the lane would be there. So you would go in, you would take a left there. What I'll do is I'll get into more detail on the inside of it. But my room was here, and then it swapped to here in 97, when obviously the bad news about Diana, I'll never forget Satch coming in and telling me there. So it was that used to be my bedroom, and then I swapped over. But when I was in this bedroom, we used to have, I think we took the sunbed, or we got another one. Sure, we got another one that actually went over the bed, if I remember rightly. I could be wrong. Either went over the bed or it was the same one. We'd got it out the garage and we'd put it in there. So we swapped it around. So when I was in there, the sunbed, when it wasn't in the garage, came out of here, went into here, and then when I moved over into this bedroom in 1997, I was having big breathing problems. I couldn't during the summer. I was literally just, my breathing was just so bad, it was unreal. And I constantly, as you can ask my mother and such, I'd have the windows open and it was just really irritating. My airwaves were restricted. It was horrendous, truly horrible. But the bedroom there, like I said, I'll get into the inner side on the next page there. So coming round the side of the property, obviously there's a few steps up here. The back door, gas cupboard. Satch can tell you all about that. So there was a few steps there that would go on to Scourskill Lane. And coming here would be Fred and Avis. Lived right here. I'm sure they parked the car there. Fred and Avis, as I've said before, Fred was, I think he was a paramedic. He was in the Bradford Fire back in the 80s or whatever that was. He was a paramedic then, or he was the fire service. It was either the fire service or a paramedic. I'm sure he was a paramedic, but he was retired. Fussy old soul, comical, big jolly son of a bitch. And his type of personality, my mother's, were never going to get along, and then they fell out. But Satch used to speak to Fred all the time, but my mother couldn't stand him, and he couldn't stand her. But then again, who could stand my mother in those days? So Billy and Kathy, Billy Williams, as I've said again, own businesses in Penrith. I just looked him on recently. I think he's chairman of Penrith Football Club now. Good on him. He was always at it. Used to be an ex-pro football player. His wife Kathy, his son Dean. Billy introduced me to Weatherigs Football Club, which I had a few games for. So they would park their cars. This was their house there, Billy and Kathy Williams. This was their house there. They'd park the car there and there. So that's their house. That's Fred and Avis's house. This was Billy Williams and Kathy. And they'd park their car there and there. We would park our car sometimes there. My mother's. Satch would park his car there. My mother would park the car there. And if I used the Orion, but when I wrote that off, I ended up obviously using the MG. And then when I got obviously my Sierra later on in the 90s, 97, I would park it there. So River Emont, yeah, that's all straightforward. He owns the Waverley pub, as I've said before, and he used to rent flats. I'm sure he used to rent flats in Penrith as well. But if you would go straight to past the Beehive pub, you'd take a right there. Just right there's King Arthur's Round Table. Whether it's the original King Arthur's Round Table, I don't know. Maybe some historian can tell you. But my bedroom window was right there. Look, I'm not saying a word. Just I'm just pointing out the facts, for God's sake. So you would go. This would be the road to Pooley Bridge, and towards the Lake Ullswater. If you kept on going, and you go that way, you would find it eventually there. If you came out of the steps, though, you'd come out the back door there. You go into the steps, and you took a left. There was an individual here by the name of George Ware. He built a huge house. Never used to be there, but he ended up building it there. His workshop was just there. He was a joiner or a builder, jack of all trades, I think. Quite successful, from what I remember. And if you just kept on going down the lane, which I'll do more videos on in terms of logging, to give you an accurate description of how things were there. Again, a very, very simple plan. I think you'll find 100% detailed and accurate. Again, how would I know if I was not there? (11:15) Monday, 18th of January, 2021. Very important.